It's fascinating. You know, like Josh earlier said that Hillary and Trump are stronger on the Middle East and ISIS than Bernie Sanders. And there was a poll that Eric alluded to also that had Bernie up by a lot in New Hampshire. And one of the things, on the economy, he crushed Hillary among the voters. On honesty, he crushed her among the voters. But when it came to ISIS, the overwhelming majority of voters who do want to vote for Sanders said that Hillary is a better choice to defeat ISIS, whatever that means. Josh, why do you think that this is how the narrative has gone, that they're stronger on ISIS and he's weaker just because his plan is more in line with what Peter suggested?
Well, here's the thing. When I read Peter's article, I was like, of course, this is the argument that comes from someone who was a diplomat, because me, as someone who was a soldier, knows that that's like the exact wrong thing to ask sort of the military to do, which is to say, like, don't let anything pass here, and that's it. I mean, every soldier hates that. That is what Desert Shield was, and it was miserable and silly. But it's also exactly right. So the perception that they're stronger on ISIS is that people want to feel like, you know, that there is someone who is actively protecting them from these shadowy bad guys who they don't really understand. And so that's why when President Obama, you know, as controversial as it has been, just running drone strike after drone strike after drone strike, it hasn't really worked, but in terms of keeping people comforted, but it has sort of worked in sowing the type of fear reputation that Trump talks about and that Hillary alludes to. You know, in sort of way he's doing the wrong thing or the taking the wrong path in a way that is more politically palatable to the people at home than what Peter is suggesting. So why people are more comforted by the thought of endless war and more death and more money, I don't know. I guess that's just what we like, a good battle. But, you know, Peter makes a hell of an argument, and I think that it is exactly right.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
You know, I think part of the issue is that we have had politicians from the highest office all the way down to local people fanning the flames, terrifying American citizens now for 14 or 15 years. No one wants to talk about the realities of these things. Everyone wants to be afraid. There's a brown guy on my airplane. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. People with hijabs are in my neighborhood. They must be terrorists. You know, you can't do that as consistently as the government has, and with as much help as the media is happy to provide them, and then expect Americans to kind of react rationally to these threats. You know, even in the debate the other night, and certainly in the Republican debates, you know, I kept hearing the phrase, what are we going to do about ISIS? Or what do we know about ISIS? You know, well, most of us don't know crap, and almost all of us are not going to do anything about ISIS. I mean, Josh was referring to the soldiers, so I feel bad for those men and women, because they're being sent out on a mission that has no definable endpoint, that has no clear purpose. And oftentimes, I suspect they're much more afraid about the Iraqis and the Syrians behind them that we're supposed to be working with than they are about ISIS in front of them. I mean, at least they kind of can figure out which way the bullets are flying if they're coming at us. But the so-called blue-on-green attacks, I suspect, are more dangerous to many of them than anything else. But again, once you scare the hell out of people, especially over a generation, it's surprising that they would react any differently than they are.
Well, and I would add, too, recently, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Marco Rubio came out saying that he bought a gun to combat ISIS at home. And, like, it's rhetoric like that, though, that makes people scared into believing that something is actually happening at home. But another question I was going to ask relating to this topic, so we talk about ISIS as a threat and how we should pull out, which I agree with. I wonder if the national debt ever becomes something that affects daily Americans, if then we'll start to really consider cutting the budget and saving money on these pointless wars. Because right now, the national debt's just a number nobody gives a shit about because it's not affecting them really. But when it starts to actually be a choice, like, okay, do we provide healthcare to citizens or fund a war? Will people then start to care more? I don't know. I hope so.
Well, but wait, we don't fund healthcare for citizens. We have crumbling infrastructure. Our schools and our roads are falling apart. Our college tuitions are the highest. I mean, in fact, it does affect us. We're just too goddamn stupid to notice it. The president bragged.
Not on like a state of emergency kind of level yet.
No, I understand that, but the president in State of the Union just bragged about the fact that we spend
whole area.
Yeah, I mean, look at Detroit. Look at Flint, Michigan.
Flint, Michigan, yeah, it's awful right now.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I mean,
Michigan is a failed state.
Yeah, it's a failed state, right? And we don't seem to be noticing these things, or we don't look at them in any kind of comprehensive way. People don't understand. I mean, if we pulled handfuls of things out of the military budget. We're spending $11 million or more a day in the Iraq-Syria war. Think about what schools could do with $11 million. Think about what you can build with that. And this is every day. Never mind the manpower and the woman power that are expended in the military that certainly could be used in other places, some kind of civilian construction course, or just simply hiring real construction workers to do this. So we are getting chewed up by our military obsessions. We're just too dumb to realize it.
I want to talk about Flint in a second, but Josh, I remember when George Bush left, his approval was in the teens. He was called a war criminal by the left. And now Obama, 7 years later, is pretty much carrying on the same policies. And now, even in Democratic primary polls, continuing those same Bush strategies on combating terror in the Middle East has now become being strong on terror. How has that happened, especially on the left?
Because no one knows how to fix it. Like, no one has an answer. I mean, the one thing that I can't help but keep noticing is that no matter who they ask, whether it's Lindsey Graham or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, with the sole exception of Rand Paul, they all say the same thing about what needs to be done. Very few people say that we need to put American boots on the ground. And of course they mean enforce, because there's already thousands of Americans over there right now. The other thing that they say that they want to do is, keep up an air campaign, maybe create a no-fly zone. But that's more of a pissing contest between like Russia and the United States than anything that's happening in the country. The other thing that they say, and even Bernie Sanders says this, is that the ground war does need to be fought, but it needs to be fought with Muslim troops. And the problem with that, which is sort of where another reason where I think Peter's idea is kind of a stroke of genius. I guess it happens to everyone, buddy. The reason that it's but is that Saudi Arabia, even our good friend King Jordan, or King Hussein in Jordan, they're seen as not good people. They are not, they may not be at Assad level awful, but to the people in their countries, it is just another dictator. So there is no Muslim army that can fight this war, because it's either the army of the dictators or the army of the death cult. And at least the death cult has heaven.
I was going to say, we need to stop saying that all Muslims are some giant brotherhood that are going to unite for a cause. It's not true. There's individual cultures within it that absolutely hate each other.
I mean, the other thing is that, why are we the only ones who seem to recognize that there needs to be some kind of Muslim army? I mean, you would think, since ISIS and all these other naughty things are happening across, a stone's throw across the border to places like Saudi Arabia or Jordan, that they might have noticed it too. But it just seems like it's always the United States who wants to put together a coalition, and who wants to unite the Arabs in these campaigns. The Arabs don't seem to be particularly interested in it, and they don't seem to feel particularly threatened by it, or they might want to do something about it. This is just another fantasy. We want to figure out some way to do this without the so-called large boots on the ground. We know that air power by itself is not effective. And so we keep waiting for, to mix things up. I mean, the Great White Hope to show up and, divisions of Saudis to cross the border or anything along those lines. It isn't going to happen. They don't see this the way we see it. And they're never going to band together and fight for something that America alone apparently sees as particularly important. Pick all these groups that are being genocidally slaughtered that we keep trying to save. Again, it's only us who seem to recognize these issues. And don't give me that crap, not you guys, but I mean, the crap of, well, only America has the power and the moral support, superiority to go in there and rescue the Syrians or the Yazidis or the Christians here or there. I mean, come on. Other people notice these things too. I mean, it's in the news. But yet it's only the United States who keeps using these things as little triggers to insert ourselves into other people's wars.
But that's because we declared 16 years ago that we're going to war with everyone who's a terrorist. So we kind of like insinuated ourselves in this discussion because, again, terrorism takes countless forms, but for some reason in this particular policy, it only means Muslim terrorism. But it is now, so we're like, it's our problem. We're taking the lead on this one when we absolutely shouldn't have. That was a terrible way to. I get painting the rhetoric of the war that way, but they actually planned to fight the war that way. Like the only reason we went into Iraq, and it's kind of hard to remember at the time, but Iraq was just one of the second of what was to be many stops. Like the Bush administration had like 6 months, like we're going to do Iraq, we'll clean up Iraq 6 months, maybe we'll slide over to Yemen, maybe we'll go down to the African coast for the winter, and then, it was this incredible arrogance, and, America can't ever unfurl itself from military cock-ups like this, at least not quickly.
We also do want to remember that large portions of the rest of the world, particularly the countries we happen to keep invading, don't see this as a war on terrorism. They see it either as a war on them or on an American imperialist war that basically the United States wants to conquer their territory, take their resources, fill in the blanks. And that's a big problem.
Cases put up a puppet government again.
I wrote a piece, I think it was on Latest quite some time ago. It was kind of my version of Red Dawn, where the Chinese invaded the United States, and it was all about how they kept trying to tell I picked the small town I used to live in, and how they kept telling us they're going to build us schools and roads, and so we should like them, and then there were incidents, and they ran over somebody's donkey with a Chinese tank, and nobody was happy about that. And Americans seemingly are impervious to understanding these things from the other side. When we drone kill children, it's collateral damage. I mean, imagine some terrorists, some guy who calls himself a terrorist guns down a cop in Philadelphia, and we go completely apeshit. We essentially nuke a hospital in Afghanistan, and it's like, oh, we made a mistake. We're sort of sorry. No one in America seems to have the ability to look at these things even slightly from the other side, and that hurts us.